Welcome to today's webinar on how you can capture these new federal funds that are dedicated specifically for EV charging for your community. Before we get started, a couple housekeeping things. We are recording this and you'll receive the recording, so you can go back over material. Please share it with your colleagues who aren't able to make it today. Also, we'll be doing Q&A at the end. So how you do that is, those of you who are familiar with Zoom, as a reminder, if you just move your cursor, there's a little bar that should pop up, and there's something called Q&A. If you click that, it allows you to enter questions. So you can ask questions as we go along, and we'll get to those at the end. We're trying to leave 20 minutes for questions, so hopefully we can get all those addressed. Today's speakers, I am so happy to have Amanda Wood join us. Some of you have heard her before. She's a senior government affairs consultant. She is an absolute expert on federal funding and how to get it. She has a pulse on it, and she's going to give you some great tips today on this specific funding that was announced recently. I'm Sandra Peterson, VP of Sales and Marketing here at Beam Global, and Andy Ike, sales manager, many of you know him, will also be tag teaming on some of our product information we'll be sharing. Right, so what we'll be covering today, we're going to start with a brief overview of sustainable EV charging and specifically the EV ARC. Some of you are familiar with it, some of you aren't. I'll be very brief here because I want to get right to this charging and fueling infrastructure grant program that Amanda's going to go over. She's going to go over the details of it, plus some of the most important criteria for your submission. And then what we're going to do, we will go a little deeper into the product because we're going to map what the Beam EV ARC, where the Beam EV ARC specifically and uniquely fits the criteria for this funding so that you can really strengthen your submission by mapping what you can deliver in your proposal to what the program is asking for. And then we'll hand it back to Amanda, and she's going to give you some tips on getting started with your submission. And then at the end, we'll go over, we're going to give you some content that's going to help you, and then we'll have our Q&A. So I'll go ahead and get started. I see several more people have joined. So for folks who just joined, we are having a Q&A at the end. So if you want to enter your questions, you just move your cursor on the screen. There should be a bar that pops up, and one of the choices on that bar is called Q&A. Type in your questions, and we'll get to those at the end. All right, so I'm going to start with a brief overview of the Beam EV ARC 2020. This is sustainable EV charging. It's also an energy resiliency and emergency preparedness asset. So the EV ARC is on the right is a picture of the actual EV ARC. This is a fully 100% renewably powered, solar powered system. It deploys, because it's off grid, it'll deploy in about 2 hours. You'll see here, we generate energy from the sun, it's stored and delivered to chargers, the brand of your choice if your community or city has a specific brand that they're working with. Again, this is deployed quickly because there's no construction, no electrical work, no utility bill. Gravity connects this to the ground, so it can also be transported if you need to relocate it. It's also a very highly visible statement for your sustainability initiatives, which we'll go into a little more detail in some of these community programs and how that's an asset. And I always like to say that it feels great to drive on sunshine. I see some of our customers are in here, so you know what I'm talking about. I get to charge here at work, and I'm driving on sunshine pretty much all the time, which just is fantastic. Zero emissions, 100%. As you can see here, this fits in a parking spot, and you can park on it, so you're not losing that precious parking, which can come at a premium, especially when you're talking communities or retail environments where you have specific code ratios of spots to square footage. It's also ADA compliant and can reach up to 12 parking spaces, so you don't need to actually designate one EV charging spot. Someone can park in different areas, and I'll show you a diagram of how that works and reaches 12 spaces. But you're not limited to just one spot with this solution. And again, it's portable, or it's transportable, but it is permanent. A lot of people leave this. It's 10,000 pounds. Nobody's going to wheel away with it overnight. I'm not going to walk through this in detail because we're going to go into much more detail after we look at the criteria. But I do want to point out, a lot of people don't realize that this traction pad, this ballast and traction pad, is a very important part of the product. This is what holds it to the ground instead of connecting to the grid or bolting or gluing. And it's heavy duty steel. And we're 125 mile an hour rated because of this. This is actual ballast for the product itself, a very important part when we talk about the emergency preparedness. And then one other thing I'll point out just physically here, all the battery storage is up here in the electronics. It's kind of the brains of the whole unit. And this is where why you can charge at night in inclement weather. You're not just, because it's solar, you're not just getting energy during the day. So I wanted to point that out. And that's also because all the battery storage and energy creation and management's going on up here, this is flood proof. So if you have low-lying areas or areas of water inundation, your electrical infrastructure won't be affected by it. I'm going to share a video because a picture tells 1,000 stories and a video tells 1,000,000. And then we're going to, and again, we'll go into more detail in the product. So if you have questions, wait till we do our deep dive in product and ask those. And here we go.
The EV ARC 2020 is the world's fastest deployed EV charging infrastructure solution. Sustainable EV charging in minutes instead of months. Get the EV charging brand you want, factory installed and ready to charge. The EV ARC is the fastest deployed, lowest total cost of ownership and most scalable solution on the market today. Rapid deployment with no permitting, no construction and no utility bill. Each EV ARC generates and stores its own electricity to deliver clean, renewable energy to your EV day or night and even during inclement weather. Permanent but transportable, the EV ARC can be relocated during emergencies, a change in EV driving patterns, or in the event that your first chosen location wasn't the best one. It's also perfect for lease locations because you own it, the landlord doesn't. Take it with you when you move. The EV ARC is designed to fit in a standard size parking space, but you won't lose a valuable slot because vehicles park on the product's base pad. It's ADA compliant too. Because it's off-grid, your EV ARC 2020 will continue to charge EVs during blackouts and grid interruptions. The emergency power panel provides vital electricity to first responders, medical workers and citizens during times of need. The EV ARC 2020 is certified to withstand winds of up to 120 miles per hour and is flood-proof up to 9.5 feet. A single EV ARC 2020 can power up to 245 miles of driving on sunshine in a day, can charge up to 6 EVs at a time and reach up to 12 parking spaces. EV ARCs are made in America at our factory in San Diego, California. Each unit goes through rigorous testing and quality control before leaving our facility. It will arrive at your site, fully charged and ready to provide the EV charging you need within minutes.
So there's a brief overview. I'd like to turn it over to Amanda Wood now, who's going to give you an overview of the program itself.
Thank you, Sandra. I appreciate it. First, I'll just say, every time I see that video, it really shows me how well you all are aligned with sort of federal priorities, whether it is resiliency, accessibility, emergency power. You guys really have it all going for you in terms of what the federal government cares about today. So good job. So I always like to sort of set the table about federal funding. My background is Capitol Hill. I was a Senate legislative director. Since I left the Hill, I've been helping public agencies like you all to get their fair share of federal funding. And in a typical year, and gosh, this hasn't been typical, has it? There are over 1,000 federal grant programs and $400 billion to public agencies. But let's go to the next slide because we've had a couple of years of really atypical spending, atypical in a good way. So in 2 years, an extra $6.9 trillion in federal spending. To give you a sense of scale, back in 2009, when we had that one recovery package, and there was only one, it was a $787 billion package. So we are just sort of rewriting the playbook on federal investment, not only in how much funding there is, but in the sort of things that the federal government wants to fund. Let's go to the next slide. And I have been waiting since passage of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act over a year and a half ago for this opportunity to come out. You know, the federal government has found ways over the years to support investment in EV charging. But this is the first time ever that the federal government has said, this is such a priority that we have a dedicated funding source. Not only is it a dedicated funding source, we're going to dedicate 5 years of funding to this. So over the next 5 years, there's going to be $2.5 billion in funding through this charging and fueling infrastructure discretionary grant program. Now, because it took them a little while to get this out, this year we're doing more than 1/5 of that. So more than 500 million. We're doing 700 million in this fiscal year. Now, in terms of what the focus is and what we're trying to accomplish, the federal government really wants to make folks comfortable with making EV purchases. They want people who have sort of classically not had access to charging infrastructure to really gain that access, so they'll feel comfortable going out and using some of the other incentives, the tax incentives, to purchase electric vehicles. So when we think about underserved areas for EV charging, often that's going to be urban communities, sort of very urban communities. It's going to be rural communities. So this funding is really designed for communities that want to make sure that folks who have not typically had access to EV charging infrastructure now will, which is fantastic. There is a 20% match for all of these investments, and I'll talk a little bit more about that and how that's structured. But let's go to the next slide. So I am thrilled that they gave us a little bit of time to work on these applications, because sometimes the turnaround is ridiculous, as I think you all have seen before. This program is split into 2 funding categories, the community program and the corridor program. Both are due on Tuesday, May 30th. Half the funding exactly is going to community, half to corridor. Community is going to be, for all of these, I think all of y'all can be applicants. It's going to be cities and counties and MPOs and city and county agencies. The community program is going to be for those really specific sort of urban or rural projects. The corridor program is going to be a little complementary to some of the NEVI work that the states are doing. There are identified alternative fuel corridors, and this is to provide additional funding to those corridors that's sort of under the control of local or regional governments rather than the state process. Next slide. Okay, so I think most of you all are going to be interested in the community grant. So the community grant is really specifically designed for level 2 charging. Areas where you can deploy these is any public road, any publicly accessible locations. So think about like public buildings, like your town hall maybe, public schools, public parks. It can be multifamily housing, any sort of publicly accessible parking facilities, even if it's owned and managed by a private entity, as long as there's not sort of a cost of admission to get to access that spot, it's totally allowable. So you could use funds to contract with a private entity. There are lots of companies out there that manage, EV charging hubs. So you could choose to do that. That's not required or sort of envisioned on the community side. The minimum award amount is going to be $500,000. So think about that. You've got this $500,000 award amount. You're going to need to match that with an additional $100,000. So it's a 20% match on whatever the federal government is providing. And these projects can go up to 15 million. They can be really big projects. I think Sandra's going to talk a little bit more about this later, but I think, we hit on so many of these requirements, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, addressing environmental justice. Certainly, we are ADA compliant and accessible. So we hit on a lot of these expectations of the grant, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that later. Let's go to the next slide. So the corridor grant, this is the other half of the funding for this year. you can absolutely do level 2 charging under this grant. It's going to be paired with DC fast charging. So as you all know, every location has different needs. This would be a good opportunity to pair those two solutions based on your residents' needs. Again, publicly accessible. Now there is a sort of a federal website that'll show you all the designated alternative fuel corridors. If you're curious about that, I can send you a link. But it covers a lot of this country. And these deployments would need to be within 1 mile of a designated alternative fuel corridor. These are probably going to be roughly the same as the NEVI corridors that your state's been working through in terms of expenditure of the $5 billion program. For these, you have to contract with a private entity. They don't expect you to manage these alternative fuel corridors. So there are a lot of gas station companies and Electrify America and others who are managing things like this. And again, we have to address environmental justice and must be accessible to and usable by individuals with disabilities. We hit on both of those really nicely. Next slide. Okay, so under the community program, there are going to be 4 focus areas, and you need to pick one of these when you apply. Under all of these, we certainly are a really viable solution and really a perfect solution. So the first is multimodal hubs and shared use fleets and services. So a lot of your communities may have a multimodal center where rideshare and maybe minibuses and different transportation options are located in one place. This would be a really great area for that. So micro mobility, ride sharing, car sharing, maybe rental vehicles. So you could use that focus area. I think the vast majority of folks are going to be applying under this urban suburban area charging and fueling solutions. So this is, this is multi-unit dwellings, areas that are highly urban. And I think the complementary sort of program to that will be the rural area charging and fueling solutions. So you're going to be really well qualified if you're highly urban or highly rural. And we can help you sort of tell that story and how the solution will support your efforts. And then there is a fourth, which is fleet vehicles that serve and operate in communities. So one thing I want to note about this, all of this charging must still be publicly accessible. So if you're going to be charging fleet vehicles, that is great, but it needs to be in a publicly accessible location. So we can, Andy and I are happy to talk through this with you, figure out which is going to be the best fit. My guess is most are either going to be urban suburban charging and fueling solutions or rural charging and fueling solutions. And there's no, among the $350 million that's coming in through the community program, there's no sort of, 50% has to go to this one or that one. Pick the option that is closest to your actual use case. No need to get super creative here. These programs are designed for you all to be able to access them. And you got a lot of different options in what your focus area is. Next slide. Okay, I want to hit on some of the things that the federal government really cares about in these applications. A little later on, I'm going to let you know that we're going to put together some language for you that will really make it easy for you to apply and address these when it comes to including EV ARCs in your application. These are, climate change and sustainability. And I should say first, these are really whole of government priorities. So these are Biden administration priorities that are an overlay on all these new grant programs. But we love them because they really, directly align with our priorities as well. So reducing greenhouse gas emissions in the transportation sector, that's an obvious one. Just by the very nature of the program, I think we take it a step further than a lot of charging does by being completely off-grid. Equity and Justice 40. If you're not familiar with the Justice 40 term, that is the administration's desire that at least 40% of federal funding go to traditionally underserved areas. And that really aligns well with equity, which is, maybe traditionally urban areas have been underserved or highly, rural areas have been underserved or highly urban areas. It's just about making sure that the federal government is funding projects throughout the country that benefit the entire country, not just pockets. Workforce development, job quality and wealth creation of good paying jobs, built in America. I think, we tell a really good story about developing a workforce for a highly skilled long-term, investment in the work that we do. Accessibility, that's an important requirement, and safety as well. So I think we really hit on all of these, and we'll go into more depth on that later. Next slide. Oh, and I think I'm going to pass that on over so we can do a deep dive on some of these.
Yeah, thank you so much, Amanda. I love that you dig through these and find out these most salient and relevant and hard-hitting points for everybody. Really appreciate that. What we're going to do is go through some of the more in-depth product capabilities and how they meet these scoring and merit criteria. So I'm going to hand that over to you, Andy, to get started with doing the deep dive on these specific requirements.
Thank you so much, Sandra and Amanda. Really fantastic information, as always. And, this is a great opportunity for us to just kind of connect the dots from some of the points that Amanda brought up, between, the requirements of these funding opportunities and then how our solution is going to directly tie into those. And, as we kind of talked about, we are uniquely suited for many of these points here. So the first point just to kind of talk about is the publicly accessible side of the grant funding. With EV ARCs, the really important thing to keep in mind is that, since our system is fully solar powered and it's fully off grid, really all that we need to make it work from our side of things is a parking space and good sunlight. So that really just kind of opens it up in terms of the options and possibilities for that side of things to place it in these publicly accessible areas. Most traditional infrastructure projects of installing EV charging, you need to know where the power is, where the infrastructure is. You need to be sure that, that location has the appropriate level of power to support an EV charging station. And many of those places do not. And so as a result of that, many clients who are looking to do traditional infrastructure projects for EV charging, they're looking down the barrel of a 6 to 18 month long, infrastructure project there from that side of things. Another great thing just about an EV ARC is the fact that, it's a very flexible solution in the fact that it's transportable. So ultimately, as the video that we saw talked about, you can move these units as needed. If your EV charging demands change, if you just have another location which has a higher demand for that charging, just gives you the flexibility to move it. And then you don't need to worry about going through another, 6 to 18 month long traditional infrastructure project. Again, you just pick the EV ARC unit up and move it with you to that next location. And then, just unlike a standard EV charging station, you just have an EV charging station when it's connected to traditional infrastructure. Oftentimes those charging stations are kind of hard to see, or often they're confused with like a parking pay station or a meter there from that front. But with an EV ARC, you can't miss it. It's a highly visible solution, it makes it very easy to see there from that front, and you can tie any kind of, community messaging that might tie into that there from that side of things too. So next slide, please. Great. So now just to kind of talk about the sort of the next requirement, talking more about, the equity side of things and Justice 40 that Amanda explained here. EV ARCs are used today, in many locations for our clients. They are already deployed in disadvantaged communities. There have already been many funding programs out there that funded these sort of initiatives there from our side of things. And, one thing with, just kind of tying into the equity and sort of the justice part is that, in many, disadvantaged communities, they oftentimes don't always have the infrastructure there that is going to support an EV charging station. So as a result of that, they're looking at, very, not just time consuming, but very expensive installs where you have work like, upgrading circuitry and transformers here and whatnot. But the nice thing about an EV ARC, again, is that you only need a parking space and good sunlight there. You don't need to worry about doing any of that kind of work there from that front. And then all the, obviously, disruption that comes from a, 6 to 18 month long infrastructure project as well, too. With our solution, it arrives on site fully assembled with your EV charger of choice already installed here at our factory, so that ultimately, once it arrives on site, it's off the truck in the parking space and, ultimately ready to charge cars in just a couple of hours after it gets there from that side of things. And, the units are customizable. We can use them for charging a wide and diverse range of things. Like, so here in this picture, this is actually a great shot of a deployment that we did for the city of Costa Mesa out here in Southern California. We were actually charging one of their community buses that is used for their senior citizen program from a mobility standpoint. So this sort of deployment very much in line with what the current programs are looking at here on that side of things. So Sandra, how about I toss it on over to you here for this next slide? So.
All right, thanks, Andy. Another initiative that is stated in some of the wording of the criteria is these what we call charging deserts. These are gaps in access. So if you just look for a minute just at the map, forget the words, the map on the right, this is a map of charging stations in an area. And you can see that there are areas that here could be a recreation center. There are roads out here. These are what are increasingly called charging deserts, and they're an issue. And this is part of what this funding is trying to close the gap. So because these are so easy to deploy, you don't need to do the infrastructure out in sometimes these remote locations. This is a good way to fill those gaps. Great for, again, rural locations, remote locations, any place also where there's environmental, it's an environmentally fragile area. So this is a very positive way and fast way to fill those charging deserts. And oh, by the way, there is, and we'll be sending this presentation, there is a map that you can go to, put out by the Department of Energy, of the EV charging stations in the US. So you can see your area and map out these charging deserts for your submission, and that will help support your initiatives.
And I'll go ahead and I'll pick it up here on this next slide here, just talking about the next requirement, which is addressing climate change, resilience, and sustainability. And, there is not much out there that can, meet this mark at the level that an EVR can there from that side of things. And there's a couple different aspects kind of tied into this requirement regarding, climate change, resilience, and sustainability. But let's go ahead and let's maybe start with just the resiliency aspects of this system. The really amazing thing about an EV is that, it's a resilient electric vehicle charging solution, which ultimately means that, even if you have a blackout or a grid outage or, heaven forbid, a major weather event like a hurricane or a tornado that might knock out power for an extended period of time, if you have an EV charging station that is connected to the grid and connected to traditional infrastructure, that charging station is out of commission. And then, by extension, your vehicles are out of commission there as a result of that until the power comes back on. But you don't need to worry about any of that with an EVR, because it'll still continue to charge your cars and, keep them running even in those times when there is no traditional grid power. And so, we have a lot of our clients who are, thinking about that from many different angles. For folks that are deploying fleet vehicles, they want to be able to have a way to keep those vehicles running, still providing vital services to constituents, even when there's no traditional grid power out there. We also have clients of ours that, are also having this in mind for their constituents, where they're putting these at, resiliency hubs or community centers, places people go when there is no traditional grid power. It's a way for people to get home to their loved ones, even in those emergency scenarios when there is no traditional grid power there from that side of things. So, and then, we've already kind of talked about this, but, since the EV ARC it's fully solar powered, it's fully off grid, ultimately it means that, any electric vehicle that charges off our system is driving on nothing but 100% clean, renewable sunshine. So that just very much, ties into the sustainability angle and the climate change angle of this requirement here. Next slide, please. Now, in addition to being able to power electric vehicles when the grid is down, an EVR can actually be configured with this optional feature, which is called an emergency power panel. That's actually what's illustrated here on the right-hand side of this slide. And what the emergency power panel is essentially it's an integrated panel of 120 volt and 240 volt outlets. And it's got this heavy duty fiberglass door in front of it where you can actually put a padlock on there so you can essentially lock it up. And as you can see here in this picture, that emergency power panel, it is located on the enclosure. So it's about 9.5 feet above the ground. So we always say it's, fully flood proof, fully vandalism proof up to that height. And ultimately, what that allows you to do is it allows the EV ARC to charge other things besides just cars. So a lot of our clients, when they're deploying EV ARCs, on a day-to-day basis, they're just using it for EV charging. It's a highly utilized piece of infrastructure, unlike a traditional backup power source like a diesel generator, which, diesel generators, they have one job and one job only, is to be a backup power source. But we're very versatile there from that side of things. And so, just really just feeds in more to the resiliency angle of things in terms of the requirements there. So, Sandra, you want to take the next slide here? We can't hear you, Sandra.
Thank you. We had jets flying overhead, so I put it on mute. We're right on the flight path for the Marine Corps Air Base. So addressing climate change, I mean, obviously because we're solar powered, but there's some good numbers that you can use for your submission here. Even if you're charging from, you have an EV, great move to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. If you're charging from the grid, on average, you're still charging with 61% of that energy being fossil fuel sourced. And an EV ARC takes that out completely of the ecosystem. So that's a pretty powerful number to put up there. Now that's dropping all the time, but that's still 61% fossil fuel that you're taking out of the ecosystem. The last year it was 62. This number is fairly new, the 61%. And this can go up or down depending on your community, but that's the national average and you can use that number. Again, this is 100% renewably powered, truly zero emissions charging. And most of us will recall COVID-19, the impossible experiment of taking all the cars off the roads. This is a picture of LA on a day with smog and after COVID or during COVID, when people just weren't driving and they were shocked at how clear the air was every day. This is what we are working for. This is what we're all together striving for. This is what the government is trying to help fund as well. And I think this mission, we're very mission driven here at Beam, but I think all of us have part of this mission in us in trying to electrify the transportation, electrify your fleets, electrify your cities, and make the communities more able to embrace the electrification of transportation. And let's see, Andy, why don't you take this one?
Sure thing. Thanks, Sandra. So, the next requirement that's on here is talking about just accessible to individuals with disabilities. And, just kind of going back to the rapidly deployable nature of the EV ARC. And again, all you need is a parking space and good sunlight. It really makes the EV ARC a great solution for getting an ADA accessible EV charging space. And so just to kind of clarify on that point here, when you deploy an EV ARC unit, because it has that steel ballast and traction pad that Sandra had pointed out, that is a 1-inch thick solid steel base plate. So it's not intended for you to place the EV ARC in the actual ADA parking space, but what you do is you place the EV ARC unit into the parking space adjacent to the ADA space, as is illustrated here in this picture here at the bottom. So what we also do is we put the EV charger within the reach requirements of ADA accessibility, and then the cord or the wire on the EV charging station itself, it's not going to interfere with the access aisle there from that front. So again, we're a really great, easy way to get an ADA accessible EV charging space to be in line here with this requirement. So next slide, please. And then just, continuing on just with the environmental justice, I think we kind of talked about already up to this point, the EV ARCs, they're 100% solar powered, they are rapidly deployed, they're a very visible impact to the community. Again, you can see these things, from wherever you are. You don't need to worry about confusing the EV charging station with a parking pay station or a meter there from that front. And with our solution, there's no digging, there's no trenching, no sort of circuitry upgrades or anything like that. Just makes it really fast and easy to deploy anywhere here that you need them there from that front. So, Sandra, was something else you want to add in there?
Yeah, I want to add here, this environmental injustice is getting quite a bit of traction. I mean, these disadvantaged and marginalized communities they bear an inequitable amount of that harm from environment. And that's something that this fund is really trying to change. And it's a big one to change, right? Even just buying an EV being quote expensive, it's a lot easier to maintain. Maintaining an ICE vehicle can cost, I think their average is $5,400 a year. If you have an older car, it's going to break down more. This is a huge impact to people in disadvantaged communities. And it can make a difference between them putting food on the table. So getting them access to infrastructure so they can get into affordable electric vehicles, lower their cost of ownership over time, is something that we're very passionate about. I just wanted to emphasize that. We have units all over the Central Valley for this purpose. This deployment you see here is actually a program in conjunction with a company called Envoy. And what they did is these are cars that can be rented. So you have an app, you can rent these cars, and this was in a multifamily disadvantaged community. This is part of the Pacoima beautification program. And these cars lived and charged on Sunshine in this area, in this community, and they're 2 cars that people could use for transportation at an affordable rate and no electric bill from this.
Great point, Sandra.
Okay, so one last thing in terms of these requirements, a lot of workforce development, and you hear us say a lot, no construction, no electrical work, and you might be thinking, oh, infrastructure, you know, I'm going to have these, you know, big crews for months and months and months. Again, this is part of your submission, but know that this is, we are expanding, we're hiring, we have clean technology jobs. These are quality career jobs, not temporary quarter or hourly labor jobs. We do a lot of cross-training. We don't hire someone and put them somewhere on the line and this is your skill. We cross-train them so that we can work the whole line and the whole floor across building the product. That helps us because if somebody's out, we can cover for them. If we have, if we need to speed things up, we can have workers move around to where a bottleneck might be. So, and also for the worker, it's, you know, they're getting new skills and developing their careers. We really try to hire and target hire, and I'm proud about this, veterans, disabled workers. It's something our CEO and the whole team is committed to. And since we're publicly traded, we do offer all of our manufacturing employees a stock option program. They can earn stock options. And we always say, you know, your wages are going to pay your bills, but stock can help you build wealth. And this wealth creation initiative, I think, is a really hard one to tie through on some of these submissions, but there's a very powerful one here in working with Beam. Okay, I'm going to hand it back over to you. How are we on time? I'm going to hand it back over to you, Amanda, for getting started with your submission.
We'll run through these quickly. Okay, so there are, if you all have seen the solicitation, it is like 70 pages. It's a lot. We're going to make it a little easier on you in a few ways. There are some things that just in my discussions with DOT and attending webinars, things that did not pop out when I read the solicitation that I just wanted to highlight. So if you are a housing or park authority, I know I've spoken with some park authorities that are interested in EV charging because it's such a great use case. You must apply for the community charging. You're not eligible for corridor. And that works perfectly because EV ARCs are an ideal solution for these community charging initiatives. Okay, it is okay to put this charging infrastructure in a privately owned area. But there cannot be a payment to enter. So if it's a parking deck that has a required payment, that's just not going to be a good fit. Go as public as possible with these as you can. For community grants, you can use up to 5% for public education and outreach. I like to point this out because, you know, I think you should be loud and proud about the work you're doing. Make sure the word gets out. I think EV ARCs, just based on how visible and cool looking they are going to take you part of the way there on that already. But I think it will make your application stronger if you put a little set aside for that public education and outreach. These are not NEVI dollars. There's no NEVI requirements on these per se. But I think, what I've heard is it's good for you to be able to address the fact that, NEVI is handling this area, which is adjacent, but we're handling this local area. So we're really adding to this overall charging network and dealing with those charging deserts that Sandra was talking about. Next slide. Just a couple more items. Okay, this was interesting to me because this is not common in a federal application. I think they're trying to give themselves a little bit of flexibility. We heard things in the webinars like, okay, so these are the size of the projects, but we reserve the right to change that, or things like that. They want to give themselves some flexibility. So if your project appears to them to be eligible for both the community and community award and the corridor award, they can decide to fund it under either. So they're giving themselves a little leeway there. I think you'll all probably be applying under the community, but don't be surprised if they shift you over because they want to balance the funding a little bit. Okay, this is interesting too. And this is a question, oh my goodness, I've gotten so many times over the past, 18 months since we've been waiting for these funds to come out. Okay, can you collect revenue from the charging? Yes, you can absolutely connect revenue from the charging, but that revenue needs to go back to your EV charging program. So think about it this way. There's a 20% match that's required. You need to do that up front, but you could sort of replenish that in some ways through the collection of revenue from the actual charging, because that money needs to go back into the program. Next slide. So if you haven't done this already, and I'm, again, really pleased that we don't need to have these until May 30th. We have just a little bit of time, but not a lot of time. Start thinking about site selection. I know that, we can help you identify some of those areas. There are online resources that show sort of where charging is accessible. You probably know where it is in your own community, but think about those charging deserts. You want to prioritize locations with high traffic counts. So, if it's near a major highway, we probably don't want it on the major highway, because that would be more of a corridor grant. So this would be complementary charging in high traffic count areas where there are underserved populations. And then work to figure out that 20% match. That's a pretty reasonable federal match. They want you to have a little skin in the game, but just go ahead and make sure, because you'll need to say in your application where those funds are coming from. Okay, next slide. Okay, been doing grants for a long time. So these are some just sort of tried and true things you want to think about when you're applying. This is not about a shopping list. This is not about, I have a list and I want to buy, 12 EV ARCs and here are the specifications. That's important. But I really want you to think in your application about how you're talking about how this is going to improve the lives of your residents. Tell a story. You have a great story to tell. We're going to give you lots of language you can use for your application, but you're also going to have to add that sort of setting the table, telling them about your community, telling them why this is a vital resource for your community. Show a local commitment to this effort. So if there are community partners in some of these underserved areas, if there are government agencies you work with, non-government, nonprofits, we're going to want to get their support, be able to list them in the application as folks who are also on board with this effort, and hopefully get a letter of support as well. Compile data. So you're going to need to show, how many people you're going to reach with this potentially. So use the data. Once you've deployed these, you're going to get even more data and more of a sense of how this is making an impact, but try to quantify the impact this is going to be having to the extent possible. And then super important, we need to get your members of Congress and senators on board, and we're here to help with that. It makes it's a huge differentiator. There are going to be lots of highly qualified applications, and when it comes down to it, the ones that have the support of their federal delegation are really going to rise to the top. So let's make sure we engage your congressional delegation. We can absolutely help you with that. Next slide. Okay, so we're here to help. We've given you a lot of information. We're going to give you even more soon. So we can help you with the draft narratives and budget justifications. We're working to put all that together for you right now. We can edit your application, make sure it's just in the best shape possible before it goes in. Sometimes having an extra set of eyes is a big help. And we also have a really good sense of what DOT is looking for in these applications. So call on us to do that. We will work on those letters of support from your congressional delegation, make sure those get in as well. Those are typically turned in after the grant is. We provide the delegation with a copy of the application, a draft letter, make it real easy on them. They've got a lot going on, so they appreciate it. And then help to expedite drawdown of funds. I think sometimes people are intimidated. They feel like there's a lot of red tape. It's really not that bad. And we can help you sort of simplify the process based on what we know about how to get those dollars out of the federal agency and into your community as quickly as possible. Next slide.
Okay.
Okay, great.
Thank you
Sandra.
so much, Amanda. We have just one more minute on this and we'll go right to the Q&A. I see a bunch of questions already in here. So what we're going to, next week, we're going to have available the narrative. So this is literally wording you can use to put directly into your submission. I find, we respond to RFQs, images help tell the story. So we'll give you images that you can use that illustrate some of the points that are in the narrative. And then what we'll do is we'll be able to provide just a starter pack. Okay, here's 2 EV ARC configurations, option 1, option 2, just so you can start the budgeting, but then you can work with your BEAM representative to kind of fine tune that for what you're trying to do. And then of course the expertise from Amanda and Andy. Many of you work with Andy, some of you work with Matt Miller, Ryan Ogan, Jason Keller, Matt Bianco. Some of you don't have a BEAM contact yet. We'll make sure that you get one and get help. So without further ado, let's go to the Q&A because I see a bunch of questions here. You know, this is one question I want to jump to first, because this gets asked every time. I think we forget to mention this. Somebody's asking, what does this cost? Or does this cost? I've got 2 questions in here. This is something that we offer. BEAM works with Amanda. We pick up the tab here. Our salespeople have access to Amanda to bring into meetings and have you help. So that is something that we pick up. So no, this isn't a cost to you. Another similar question someone had was, you know, hey, we're a really small team. Is there somebody who can help with this? We can help to a certain degree. Yeah, it can provide some guidance. So that's certainly something we can step in. I don't know about writing everything for someone, so let's have that conversation. But we certainly can help you get your submission reviewed in really good shape and a very strong submission. Let's see. Here's one. I think this would be for you, Amanda. Do you know if this grant for the community, if this one requires any match from the local agency?
Yes, it does require a 20% match. Both of the grants require a 20% match, and that's by statute. So Congress directed DOT to put in place that requirement.
Okay. We just experienced a 12-foot surge from Hurricane Ian. Oh my goodness. Can these emergency power boxes be placed higher? Andy, do you want to take that or do you want me to?
I'd be happy to speak to that. So just one thing with EV ARCs that is consistent is sort of the sizing and sort of the whole form factor of it there from that side of things. So every single unit specifically designed and engineered to fit within a standardized parking space, like we've said. And so, the location of the enclosure and then by extension, the emergency power panel is something that's consistent across the board for all of our deployments there for outside. So like we mentioned before, that emergency power panel is about 9.5 feet above the ground there for that side of things. So fully flood proof up to about that height. So.
And we've seen, like the city of New York is our largest municipality. They've had the older model that did have the batteries on the lower area. And what they've done is they've moved their EV ARCs to higher ground and replace them with the newer ones. So these are movable if you have an extraordinary event coming up. Okay, let's see. Here's a question, Andy, for you as well. Can the lines to charge cars be driven on? I can see where people would not bring them back to the hooking area.
The lines as in the parking space lines, or?
I think he's talking about the cables. They're 18-foot cables. So kind of like, can you drive over your hose at home?
Yeah, we generally would not recommend that there from that side of things. These cables that are on these, they're relatively heavy duty, but still, consistent driving over them is not going to be good for their, long-term health there from that side of things. I will say that, with most of the EV charging brands that we incorporate and that we incorporate on the EV ARC, the cords are usually 18 to 20 feet long, and they either have like a cable retention system on them, like with a charge point station, for example, or they have a nice holster where you can just wrap it up on there. You just need to get your drivers just used to that habit of wrapping it up just to maintain the cord so that it ultimately maintains the charging station so it lasts as long as possible. So.
And as an EV driver myself, it's not been an issue. Once in a while, someone might leave it where it's on the base pad, but it doesn't get so far out just by dragging it back and plugging it back in. It's not usually a problem, but I have seen a tire or two on them, and they are, like Andy said, very heavy duty. Here's another question. I'm happy to take this one, Andy. So question about the base steel, and if it's weather resistant to salt air, rust resistant. So we powder coat the steel. So it's steel, but it's powder coated. It's marine grade powder coat. So it is rust resistant. So there's our answer there. It's rust resistant. It's not that it would never rust. Once in a while, I might see an older unit. It's got a little bit here. It doesn't hurt the unit, but it is rust resistant, and we do the marine grade powder coating, which, as if you know, it's not just paint. Powder coating is a heavy duty coverage for steel. Let's see. Is this capable of charging mass transit buses? Andy, do you want to take this one?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So, our solution is, more designed for charging your small light duty types of vehicles, even some sort of light duty, medium duty vehicles, as they're often referred to. Like, some of the types of vehicles we're actually charging for our clients are like, for City of Los Angeles, we're charging electric street sweepers for them there on that side of things. That kind of falls in between that sort of light and medium duty classification. But, because our system is, it's fully solar powered and it's fully off grid, just with sort of the size and form factor is always consistent with the EV ARC. And so as a result, just maybe not the best solution for charging your larger electric vehicles like a bus or something like that, because they just have much larger batteries, much larger energy requirements. Now, this is a good opportunity for us to talk about, maybe our revamp of our product line that we offer called our Solar Tree product line, which we are going to be hopefully offering here later this year or next year on that side, which is going to be specifically designed for charging medium and heavy duty vehicles like that there from that side. Sandra, anything else you might want to add there on that front? Or
I think that's good. Yeah, thank you. And it's all level. This is level 2 charging as well. I have a couple people asking if the slides will be available. Yeah, we'll be sending you a PDF of these slides and a link to this video. Share them liberally. Another question for you, Amanda. Can you clarify on the fleet electrification facet of the grant? Do the chargers need to be just physically in an area available to the public? If the charger is restricted in its software to only charge fleet vehicles, would that still be eligible for the grant?
I'm afraid not. No, they have to actually be able to charge public vehicles.
And to add that for fleet managers, if you have in your fleet vehicles that are serving the community, that's what this is intended for, this particular fund. Let's see. Is the product considered a DC fast charger, or is DC fast charger an option for the product? Andy, do you want to take this? We kind of addressed this in the previous, but.
Yeah, you kind of mentioned before that, EV ARCs, they're almost always, set to charge at a level 2 charging speed. So that's right in line with 85% of other publicly available chargers there from that front. We are working on a EV ARC configuration that will be able to provide DC fast charging. We've done a couple of beta deployments to the state of California. And basically what we have done with that is where we've taken multiple EV ARC units and essentially interconnected them together to power one single DC fast charging station. So that's why we've done a couple of beta deployments on. We're still kind of going through the product testing and development of it here on that side. So we are hoping for a release of that, hopefully later this year, if not early next year there on that front. So we will have that available in addition to the Solar Tree that we had talked about before, which is going to be used for not just medium and heavy duty vehicles, but we are also, I think, going to have a fast charging configuration with that Solar Tree product line as well too. So.
Could I just jump in with one other point? So the community charging is designed for level 2 charging applications. That's what the federal government is looking for in an application. And the corridor charging, yes, you can do DC fast charging. You can also do a combination of both. So I think, when we looked at things like NEVI, where it was requiring DC fast charging, that was perfect for that application use case. EV ARCs are really ideal for this application and this federal initiative.
Thank you, Amanda. Next question, does this work in parallel parking? I'll take this one, Andy, as well, or only for parking lots? Well, it can be a non-parking lot, but parallel parking is not an option for the EV ARC just because of the configuration of the column. But herringbone, nose-to-nose parking, and straight against a wall parking spots, and at an angle, again, they call that herringbone. Those are certainly all suitable for the EV ARC. We also have people putting it out if in a park, it can be out in the middle of middle of nowhere. So it doesn't necessarily have to be in a parking lot as long as the ground is stable. We don't deploy on sand, for example, but we can on gravel. So it doesn't have to be in a parking lot, but it's conveniently designed to fit in the size of a standard parking space. Good question.
Sandra, just one other thing I'd like to jump in on, just the parallel parking side of things, is that, we are in the process of developing a new product line called our EV Standard product line, which is essentially going to be an on-street EV charging solution that's going to be, very similar in terms of the concept of the EV ARC, in terms of, rapidly deployable, solar plus batteries, and then that's specifically going to be designed for on-street parking, going to be a really ideal solution for parallel parking. So that is something that's in product development. We don't quite have as much of a firm timeline on that product, but that is going to be a fantastic solution we're going to be able to offer for parallel parking in the future. So
great. Let's see. Oh, we got a shout out from Modesto. Thank you. Let's see. Can you provide the link to the government website that shows where the EV charging stations are available? Yes. Let me see. While someone is answering a question, I'll navigate to that page and put that in the chat. Do you know if this grant for the community one requires any kind of match? Oh, we already answered that one. Sorry. Just experienced a 12-foot surge. Sorry, I have to jump off for a minute. Bye. I guess I should filter these before just reading them. Okay, here we go. One of your headquarter locations is San Diego, so the answer is probably good, but please confirm that these structures are seismically sound and somehow the engineering calcs are available for submittal. And two, if we have a fleet of 20 vans, can you go through a potential strategy to EV charge those vehicles? We can charge more than one vehicle at one time. Can we deploy it with less than 10 stations? This is a pretty detailed answer. And Andy, why don't you take it topically, in terms of the wind rating and the seismic letter and all that. But I think this is worth a deeper conversation on what configurations will work for your vehicles. And while you answer that, I'm going to go find this other.
Sure. So our solutions, we do, like we mentioned before, it's wind rate up to 125 miles per hour sustained winds. We do have a letter from our independent structural engineering firm who has confirmed that with more of that information there on that front, so we can provide that as needed. And then, just kind of going back to, the sort of the side of the question about, coming up with a sort of a configuration that's going to work. That is something that is a standard part of our process here at Beam. So whenever clients of ours are looking to obtain a quote for EV ARC units, before we have any kind of a discussion about our technology and what it can do, what we want to do is have a discussion about and learn a little bit more about, the vehicles we're going to be charging off the EV ARC system. Are they just, for the general public? Are they, is the workplace charging deployment, or is it for internal fleet vehicles? We'll talk a little bit about the location you're looking to place it. Is it somewhere where it's behind the fence, where maybe you don't need access control, or somewhere where it's out in the open, where you do need that access control, or maybe time limit restrictions and things like that. And then ultimately, that whole discussion is going to help determine what your energy needs are, and that will drive us towards how many EV ARC units you're going to need. What brand of EV charging station makes the most sense, how many plugs and ports, how much battery storage in the unit makes the most sense. So that's something that, you'll work out with your account rep when it gets to the quoting side of the discussion here. So.
Okay, thank you, Andy. A couple folks asking if we can have a follow-up call. Absolutely. So those of you, the answer is yes, we'll definitely be following up. I did put that link in the chat window. We'll also be sending you this presentation, so this link should work in your PDF file as well. Let's see, can jurisdictions, how are we on time? We're a little bit over. I'm willing to go over, and we're recording this, so if some of you have to hop off, totally understand. But let's get some of these questions answered for people who have the extra minute. Let's see, can jurisdictions apply for more than one focus area in the same application? Amanda.
Sorry, say that again.
Can the jurisdictions apply for more than one focus area in the same application? So for example, there is those four categories within the community.
No, I do not recommend that. No, you have to select one and then really build your application around that. Like, go for it, go all in. You want to show that you're focused and that you have a real sort of vision for EV charging infrastructure within your community.
Okay, all right. Can the device be set up to charge for use? Ah, okay, good question. So can we, does it have to be free public charging, or can you charge for it?
So you can charge for it, absolutely, but that funding has to go back into your EV charging program. So you have to plow that back into, you know, whether it is expanding your program or maintenance costs or things of that nature. So you can't just pocket that, it has to go back into the program. But a nice way to think about offsetting that 20%, you're going to be paying that 20% upfront. So I think it's a good, you know, it makes sense. They're allowing you to collect those funds though.
And I'll add to that, the 2 sample configurations that we'll provide for you to get your budgeting started. We'll have one that has a charging capability, charging, i.e. transactions, right? And one that would just be free open public charging, so that you can kind of look at the difference and maybe even do a mix. Let's see. What are the costs of the ARC? So I'll just answer that quickly. It depends on your configuration, but they start around 60, you know, a lot of bells and whistles, 80,000. And then delivery depends on where you are in the country. We ship from San Diego, so local is closer, and we do custom shipping quotes for folks depending on how many units and what state you're in. And we can give you those quotes. Seeing duplicate questions here, so let me just find it's a great question. I don't think we're going to get, we have like 70 questions. And the charges should be placed in public parking lots that are open all day, then closed at night. Question.
So you know what? That is a good question. I don't know how to answer that. I would say that your application would be stronger if you're not putting it in areas that are not accessible part of the day. So it is possible that would be okay with USDOT, but in order to have the strongest possible application, you want to have as few barriers to charging as possible.
Let's see, we talked about charging, term of drawing down. What's the term for drawing down awarded funds?
I've always just called it drawing down awarded funds. So there is, once you are, notified that you've been funded, there is it can be as quick as a 6 to 8 week process to work with the federal government to complete any additional paperwork. You'll all have your own sort of procurement process as well. I usually tell people that your local procurement process takes longer typically than the federal process. So it's not typically the federal government that's holding things up when it comes to drawdown.
So that's just the process of getting that money transferred into your budget. Yeah. And is there you said what, 4 to 8 weeks you've seen?
It can be as quick as 6 to 8 weeks, but that's why you want to make sure that you sort of have your ducks in a row from a procurement standpoint as quickly as possible. Federal government's not going to put any other, sort of extra procurement requirements on you. But sometimes local government procurement processes are long.
Okay, I'm going to take 2 more questions, but what I will do is I will have your BEAM contact address any questions from people who haven't had a chance to get to. I'm really sorry. Just want to be sensitive to your time. But so 2 more questions. Does the application require a resolution from our local agency, council, or board?
It does not require it, but I know that many local governments require that. So that's one of the reasons why we wanted to make sure that we are in front of you now, because you probably have a bi-monthly city council meeting or something of that nature, board meeting. So if your community does have that requirement before applying for federal funding, I would go ahead and start that process now.
And last question I'll take, since none of the level 2 charging stations currently meet all of the federal requirements, i.e. Buy America, software systems that are not specific to the manufacturer, et cetera, how is BEAM working with the compatible level 2 chargers to ensure all requirements are met? Do you want to address that, Andy, or do you want me to?
If you want to take that, I mean, I can speak to some high level things if you'd like. Just the fact that that when the EV ARCs, first off, they're built here, right here in San Diego, here from that side of things. We are aware that there are changing requirements that maybe Amanda could speak to as it relates to Buy America and Buy American, and how they're kind of tied into these different funding opportunities there from that front. But Sandra, anything else you maybe wanted to add on top of that there, or Amanda?
Yeah, we're Buy American compliant because we're manufactured in the U.S. and we fall into that compliance under the commercial off-the-shelf product. So the products that you would be putting in your submission and everything we talked about today are COTS, commercial off-the-shelf classified. So you're good there. Now, when you talk about federal requirements of Buy America, the software system, this isn't. I don't think there's the Buy America requirement for this. I know it's very confusing, but that's where you have to trace your minerals back to the mine. I don't see that requirement in here, but the American Trade Act, which we are compliant with, is not a problem. Okay.
Can I just add to that real quick? Yeah, just add to that real quickly. So all of these new Buy America requirements are hard to comply with. And so as a result, there are many, many waivers, waivers specific to certain industries and solutions, to certain products that are being offered. Some are blanket waivers, some are not. Just know that if you get in a situation where you do require a waiver based on even your local requirements, that we have a great story to tell about the fact that we are employing Americans. We are using every American product we can. And I think that we'd be in a really strong position to help you with any sort of waiver request. So call on us for that as well.
Yeah, and thank you for bringing that up, Amanda. There is a waiver for EV charging through, I think, 2024, but there's only certain things that are waivered. So we have to look at the EVSE, which charger we're putting on it. But right now, the two configurations that we're putting together for you should be no problem. Okay. On that note, Amanda, thank you. Everybody who is attending, thank you so much. We really appreciate your time, your interest. Good luck with your programs. We're excited for what you can do for your communities, and we want to help you.